The streets of Britain once echoed with them, outside terraced houses in Birmingham, beneath the yellow glow of motorway service stations, lined beside rainy seaside promenades. These cars became part of ordinary life. They carried families to holidays in Devon, workers to factories before dawn, and ambitious young couples toward the fragile promise of a better future. And then, almost without warning, they disappeared. Some rusted away quietly, others collapsed beneath changing fashions, economic turmoil, or their own disastrous flaws. But for a brief moment in the 1960s, these were the cars Britain believed in. So, before we begin, subscribe and join us as we return to the roads, factories, and forgotten dreams of Britain's motoring past. Because the further we climb this list, the stranger their disappearance becomes.
At number 10, the Morris Minor. The Morris Minor had already become a national institution by the early 1960s. Designed by Alec Isagonis before he transformed motoring forever with the Mini, the Minor represented something deeply reassuring. Simple curves, friendly headlights, honest engineering. For many British families, it was the first real step beyond bicycles and buses. Fathers polished them proudly on Sunday mornings, while children squeezed into the back seats for summer journeys to Blackpool or Brighton. Its tiny 948cc and later 1098cc engines were hardly exciting, but that was never the point. The Minor was dependable in a country still recovering from austerity. It asked little from its owners and gave them freedom in return. But Britain was changing quickly. By the mid-1960s, buyers wanted modernity, sharper styling, more speed, more sophistication. Compared with newer rivals, the Minor suddenly looked old-fashioned, almost painfully so. Production finally ended in 1971, and within a decade, rust had consumed thousands. Today, spotting one on British roads feels like glimpsing a surviving memory from another country entirely. But the car at number 9 vanished, despite once symbolizing modern British confidence itself.
At number 9, the Ford Anglia 105e. The Ford Anglia 105e looked like the future when it arrived in 1959. Its reverse rake rear window made it instantly distinctive, while its compact proportions perfectly suited narrow British streets. Young families adored it. Here was a car that felt affordable without feeling cheap. The new overhead valve engine gave lively performance for its class, and suddenly ordinary households could imagine themselves joining Britain's growing consumer age. For salesmen, teachers, and ambitious factory workers, the Anglia represented upward movement, a small but meaningful badge of progress parked outside semi-detached homes. Yet its success contained the seeds of its disappearance. The Cortina arrived and changed everything. Bigger, more stylish, more aspirational. Overnight, the Anglia became yesterday's car. By the late 1970s, most surviving examples were battered, rusty commuters nearing the scrapyard. And once Britain's scrapyard swallowed them, they vanished with frightening speed. Still, the next car disappeared for reasons far more painful.
At number 8, the Austin Cambridge. The Austin Cambridge was everywhere during the early 1960s. Taxi fleets, suburban driveways, provincial high streets. You could hardly travel through Britain without seeing one. Its restrained styling reflected a nation still shaped by post-war modesty. No extravagance, no flamboyance, just practical middle-class respectability. Families trusted Austin because Austin felt British in the deepest possible sense. Familiar, safe, predictable. Under the bonnet, the reliable B-Series engines offered solid endurance, while the soft suspension made rough roads bearable during long holiday drives north through rain-soaked motorways. But ownership often became a battle against corrosion. British steel of the era simply could not withstand the damp climate forever. Wheel arches dissolved, floors weakened, doors sagged. By the late 1970s,
countless Cambridges were disappearing from driveways almost overnight. Many owners never intended to abandon them. The cars simply rotted faster than memories could preserve them. And what came next would suffer an even sadder fate.
At number 7, the Hillman Minx. The Hillman Minx once represented ordinary Britain at its most optimistic. Clean styling, sensible pricing, and easy drivability made it a familiar sight from London suburbs to Yorkshire mill towns. Roots Group marketed it as dependable family transport, and for a while it succeeded brilliantly. There was something deeply comforting about the Minx. It was not glamorous, it was not fast, but it belonged to a generation rebuilding stability after years of hardship. Owners remembered winter mornings with reluctant heaters and fogged-up windows, yet they also remembered children sleeping peacefully in the back seats during long nighttime journeys home. Then came decline. Foreign competition intensified. Japanese reliability began humiliating British manufacturers. Meanwhile, Roots itself struggled financially, and the Minx gradually lost relevance in a rapidly modernizing market. By the time production ended, few people realized they were witnessing the disappearance of an entire era of British family motoring. But the next car collapsed, despite once feeling remarkably advanced. At number 6, the Vauxhall Victor. The Vauxhall Victor looked startlingly American when it debuted. Chrome-heavy styling, sweeping lines, and panoramic windscreens gave ordinary British buyers a taste of Detroit glamour. Suddenly, even modest households could experience something resembling transatlantic sophistication. The Victor became wildly popular during the early 1960s, especially among drivers who wanted their neighbors to notice them. It felt modern, stylish, hopeful. Unfortunately, beneath the glamour lay serious weaknesses. Early models suffered catastrophic rust problems, so severe that some cars deteriorated within only a few winters. Suspension failures and poor durability damaged the Victor's reputation permanently. For many owners, pride slowly turned into embarrassment. Beautiful showroom dreams became expensive repair bills, sitting on damp driveways. And yet, somehow, things were about to become even more disastrous.
At number 5, the Singer Gazelle. The Singer Gazelle arrived carrying quiet elegance. Produced by Roots Group, it offered a slightly more refined alternative to mainstream family saloons. Polished wood trim, two-tone paint, gentle sophistication. For lower middle-class Britain, the Gazelle felt aspirational without seeming arrogant. It allowed ordinary families to imagine themselves climbing socially during a decade obsessed with class and appearance. But underneath, it shared many components with humbler Hillman models, and buyers increasingly noticed the contradiction. Reliability frustrations mounted, build quality declined. Meanwhile, buyers seeking prestige now had more exciting alternatives from Europe. The Gazelle slowly faded into obscurity, leaving behind only scattered memories of carefully polished chrome parked outside suburban homes. Still, the next car once carried the hopes of Britain itself.
At number 4, the Austin Maxi. It should have been revolutionary. Launched in 1969, it offered front-wheel drive, a hatchback layout, flexible seating, and immense practicality, years before many rivals understood such ideas. In theory, it represented the future of British motoring. Families loved the spacious interior. Long motorway journeys suddenly became easier. Folding seats transformed it into something astonishingly versatile for the era. But British Leyland's disastrous quality control poisoned everything. Gearboxes felt dreadful. Reliability proved inconsistent. Assembly quality varied wildly. Owners who desperately wanted to support British industry often found themselves stranded beside roads instead. There was genuine sadness surrounding the Maxi, because the idea itself had been so promising. And the next car damaged more than customer confidence.
At number 3, the Wolseley 1500. The Wolseley 1500 carried an air of faded British dignity. Upright grille, walnut dashboard, leather seats.
it attempted to offer miniature luxury to aspiring middle-class buyers. Driving one through quiet village roads in the early 1960s felt respectable, proper, almost stately. Older buyers, especially, adored them. They represented continuity in a rapidly changing society. But beneath the polished veneer, the design was aging badly. Performance lagged behind rivals, and younger buyers increasingly viewed cars like the Wolseley as relics from another generation. As Britain embraced modern styling and foreign competition, cars like the 1500 simply disappeared from relevance. Yet the next vehicle vanished despite once dominating Britain completely.
At number 2, the Triumph Herald. The Triumph Herald looked charmingly optimistic. Styled by Giovanni Michelotti, it brought continental flair to British roads at surprisingly affordable prices. Its delicate lines and compact dimensions made it enormously popular with young drivers and small families alike. There was joy in the Herald, a sense of lightness. Summer drives through the countryside with windows open and radios crackling softly beneath gray skies. But separate chassis construction created durability issues over time, while rust consumed body panels with brutal efficiency. Thousands were driven hard, neglected, and discarded. By the 1980s, a car once seen absolutely everywhere had become strangely rare. And then there was number 1.
At number 1, the Austin Allegro. No car better captures the tragedy of Britain's collapsing automotive confidence during the 1970s. Introduced as the successor to the beloved 1100 and 1300 range, British Leyland hoped the Allegro would secure the future of British family motoring. Instead, it became a symbol of disappointment. Its awkward styling confused buyers immediately. The infamous square steering wheel became a national joke. Build quality problems spread rapidly, while strikes and factory chaos further damaged public trust. And yet, millions of ordinary people still bought them. Because many families wanted to believe. They wanted British industry to succeed. They wanted affordable family motoring built by British hands in British factories. For some owners, the Allegro carried children to school every morning and luggage to caravan holidays every summer, despite all its flaws. That is what makes its story strangely emotional. The Allegro was not merely a bad car. It was the visible collapse of industrial confidence across an entire nation. And when these cars disappeared, something else disappeared with them. A version of Britain. An era of smoky factories, Sunday hand-washing cars on council estates, family road trips through rain-covered motorways, and a country slowly trying to reinvent itself after war. Today, these surviving cars feel less like machines and more like moving photographs. Tiny fragments of forgotten Britain, still humming softly beneath faded paint and polished chrome. And perhaps that is why people still stop and stare when one passes by. Because for a brief moment, they remember. Which of these vanished British cars brings back the strongest memories for you? And